On the morning of December 1st, 1948, at 6:30 a.m, police were contacted regarding the body of a man that was found on Somerton Beach in the suburb of Glenelg in Adelaide, South Australia. He had no identification. There were no clues left behind to assist police to find out who he was. The only thing that could be determined, however, was that the man was poisoned and left to die. But who was this man? Why was his body left on a beach? Who or what caused this occurrence to happen? These questions and many more were beginning to become unanswered, stemming into a 73-year investigation of this unnamed individual. A person whose physical appearance was essentially unmarked and could be recognized, had no name, family, friends, or any recorded documentation to narrow down the search to his identity. The case remained unsolved for decades, gripping Australia and luring in international interest. This is the mystery of the Somerton Man. Upon initial inspections at the scene of the body, police noted a few things. He was found across from the crippled children's home on the sand, which, for context, was on the corner of the Espionage and Bickford Terrace. He was laying down, resting his head against the seawall with his legs extended and feet crossed. Also on the topic of physical appearance, he appeared to be well kept and healthy, with neat and tidy clothing. His face was clean shaven with no physical trauma or any indication of injury. His attire that he was wearing at the time of the discovery of the body was a white shirt, brown trousers, red, white and blue tie, formal footwear, brown knitted pullover, and a brown jacket. While there were no clear clues as to who he was or where he had come from, or even just a name to this man, he did, however, leave behind a handful of clues that could assist police with what transpired prior to his death. Primarily, these all were seen to be found on his body, mainly in his clothing. Some of these clues included a half-smoked cigarette on his right collar of his coat, an unused second-class rail ticket from Adelaide to Henley Beach, a bus ticket departing from Adelaide to Glenelg, a narrow aluminium comb made in the United States, a half-empty packet of juicy fruit chewing gum, an Army Club cigarette packet containing 7 sticks from a different brand named Kensitas, and a quarter-full box of Bryant & May matches. Upon investigating the contents of his clothes, all labeling on the clothing was removed, which police presumed was cut off. And he had no wallet, money or other personal items on him, other than, of course, what was already found on the body.
The investigators at the scene determined that the man had died overnight, approximately around 1 a.m. During the initial call for witnesses, many claimed to have seen the man in the exact same position the night before, but did not think much of it as they thought it was either him being drunk or asleep and did not wish to disturb him. One eyewitness account from a couple states that they saw the man at around 7 p.m. raising his right arm while laying down, before limply dropping it. Another witness claimed that they saw another man looking down at the body from the top of the steps that led to the beach. In 1959, another witness came forward stating that himself and 3 other men saw the unnamed man carrying another person on their shoulders around Somerton Beach. Although this was put into a police report, this account did not match up with the others made by the witnesses beforehand. With no other people from the local area approaching police with information, and no other pieces of evidence to use for the investigation, It was time for police to send the body up for autopsy, although there was one little clue that could help police just one step further. A piece of paper that was rolled up, tucked in a pocket in the man's clothing, which read, "On the morning of the 14th of January 1949, just over a month since the body was first discovered, staff working at the Adelaide railway station discovered a brown suitcase, which had been checked into the station's cloakroom on the 30th of November 1948, after 11 am. It was brown with no label. Not very exciting. In the suitcase contained various clothing items of no particular interest. The investigators noted that the lining in the suitcase matched with the lining used in a repaired pocket in the man's trousers. Police investigators also found that the tags on the clothing were removed, but the name Kian was written on a tie, laundry bag, and singlet. There were also 3 dry cleaning marks found, but neither of these assisted in the investigation long term, as there were no records of a Kian missing in any English-speaking country, nor were there any leads of where the dry cleaning of the clothes took place. However, this did help investigators figure out that the clothes in the suitcase were second-hand. They examined the stitching and material of the gusset and the coat, and narrowed down the origin of manufacture to be in the United States. Not only that, but clothing of this style, let alone any clothing, was difficult to acquire at the time due to the effects of World War II, where sourcing material was hard to obtain. Police then went on to check records of incoming trains at the Adelaide station. It was believed that the man took an overnight train that departed from Sydney, Melbourne, or Port Augusta. This is where the investigation was first hindered. As mentioned before, there was a ticket for a second-class train to Henley Beach, which was for the 10:50 am train. Considering that the suitcase was checked in at 11 am, this stumped investigators. Why was the luggage checked in so late? Was the man late? What time did the man arrive at Adelaide? Why did the man choose to take a bus to Glenelg instead? These questions would remain unanswered. Here are the autopsy findings after a physical inspection of the body by the coroner. The initial autopsy, performed shortly after the discovery of the man's body, showed that the man had eaten a pasty roughly 3 to 4 hours before his death. The coroner, Dr. Dwyer, did come to the conclusion that the man had consumed poison, swallowing a substance which could have been a barbiturate or a soluble hypnotic. Other than the consumed pasty, there were no signs of any foreign substances found in the body. As such, the coroner could not determine the cause of death specifically, and with nothing found that could help with the man's identity, the coroner was unable to connect any social factors to the death either. But this prompted police to perform an embalming of the body on the 10th of December 1948, after a week-long lack of witnesses or people who may have known about the man. And while police were looking towards the possibility of this being turned into a cold case, other parts of the judicial system weren't wanting to give up hope just yet. As previously mentioned, there was a piece of paper found in one of the man's pockets. Public library officials did manage to translate the phrase, but they also discovered where the phrase originated from. It came from a collection of quatrains written by Omar Khayyam. He was a Persian mathematician philosopher, and poet who had significant contribution in each respective fields. Specifically, this was a book republished from an original collection of quatrains written by Khayyam, organized by a British author by the name of Edward Fitzgerald, titled The Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam. The published version relevant to this case was the 1941 version of the book, which investigators would later find. What made this copy of the book so important was that at the back page there was a rip in the page, one which matched the shape of the paper found in the coat of the Somerton Man. When police recovered the book, two unusual things were found: a code and an unknown phone number. The code was found on a blank page near the end of the book. There were faint indentations representing 5 lines of text, with each line containing only letters in capital form. Looking at the page, it's apparent that there are noticeable errors in the writing. For example, the second line of letters seems to be completely crossed out, while in other sections there seems to be smudged words and misshapen letters. This new addition of evidence led to many detectives, code experts, and even Department of Defense cryptographers attempting to crack the code, ranging from amateur to experienced. Instead, some researchers, like linguist John Rayling, believed that the strings of text could just be a shorthand form of sentences hidden within the letters. Comparison to varying different texts from books and other literature were made at the time, but nothing really came up. No matches were made. So the code was yet another dead lead in the case. Police traced the unlisted phone number in the book to a woman living in the area named Jessica Thompson. Turns out she only lived about a kilometre away from where the body was found, but she denied knowing the man. Police showed the woman a plaster cast of the mystery man to see if she would recognise the face, but apparently she nearly fainted. She again denied knowing him. There are conflicting reports as whether or not this was Jessica Thompson or another woman, but we're not going to stray too far away from Jessica here, as she is still relevant in this scenario, because she apparently, according to police records, owned the same copy of that book, which was in turn given to her by a man named Alf Boxall at a hotel in Sydney. Police interviewed Alf and came up with no real answers from him either, so this was yet another closed connection. In 1949, the body of the unknown man was buried in Adelaide's West Terrace Cemetery. Over time, professionals from different fields would make their attempt at identifying the man, but to no avail. And in the many years following the case, over time, DNA degrades and it is destroyed, meaning they couldn't really make any discovery of any new leads, which meant the chances of identifying the Somerton Man became very, very, very slim, if not impossible. Not only that, but other key evidence no longer exists, like the brown suitcase, which was destroyed in 1986. Witnesses in the case that were interviewed by police have either passed away or now remain reclused, and even the witness statements have suddenly disappeared from the police files for some reason.
In recognizing a communist, physical appearance counts for nothing. If he openly declares himself to be a communist, we take his word for it.
A persistent theory about the man's demise was in relation to espionage. The death of the Somerton Man occurred during a period where the Cold War had begun, and tensions between the Soviet Union and the Western Allies was brewing. One point that conspiracists tend to bring up is that the man had been in close proximity to two important sites. One was Radium Hill, Australia's only active uranium mine at the time, which was a 5-hour drive from Glenelg, and two, Woomera Range, a major Anglo-Australian military and aerospace facility, also 5 hours from Glenelg. As the Soviet Union was rapidly expanding its nuclear arsenal post-World War II, spies were commonly transferred to countries like the US, UK, Australia, and New Zealand to study and observe the movements of Western military projects before reporting back to the Kremlin. Not only was the man found dead during this time, but the death also occurred during a time when the Australian government was cracking down on Soviet espionage, and organisations like the ACO or the Australian Security Intelligence Organisation were formed to help combat this. There was another possible lead that stemmed from an Adelaide woman who found an identification card in her father's possessions belonging to a H.C. Reynolds, an 18-year-old British male. Issued from the United States, the card found was specifically given to foreign seamen during World War I. Anthropologist Maciej Henneberg in October of 2011 for further evaluation. When comparing the card to the Somerton Man, Henneberg noted that the features such as the nose, the lips and the eyes were not as reliable as the close similarity of the ear. When the card was then shared to the US National Archives, UK National Archives and the Australian War Memorial, who despite the issue date being listed as 28th of February 1918, failed to find any matching records. Horace Charles Reynolds, who died in 1953 and therefore could not have been the Somerton Man. So for the next 60 years, the case was pretty much closed.
For decades, the mystery of the Somerton Man has baffled the state. Found slumped on the foreshore of an Adelaide beach in 1948, his identity has eluded police.
But now, a potential breakthrough. A local researcher claims he's solved the puzzle and can finally put a name to the face.
In March of 2009, a University of Adelaide team led by Professor Derek Abbott began an attempt to solve the case through cracking the code and proposing to exhume the body to test for DNA. Abbott's first discovery in the investigation involved a piece of waxed cotton found on the clothing, which helped source the potential country of origin. Although his efforts were hampered quite quickly early on, as the majority of the evidence used during the initial investigation back in the 40s had disappeared, like the suitcase, and also autopsy notes from the coroner had also seemed to disappear from public record. So with the evidence out of the picture, Abbott then teamed up with many genealogists and other professionals, such as the previously mentioned Professor Henneberg. In June of 2010, Abbott obtained a photograph of Jessica Thompson's eldest son, Robin Thompson, who clearly showed that he, like the unknown man, not only had a large ear, but also hypodontia. According to the DNA results, in comparison to other people from around the world at the time, the chance that this was a coincidence has been estimated as between 1 in 10 million and 1 in 20 million. So already we have some new information that could assist Abbott with his investigation. After finding out that Robin Thompson had died in 2009, Abbott contacted Rachel Egan, the daughter of Roma Egan and Robin Thompson, who had been adopted and grew up in New Zealand. They even got married. Later on, Abbott gained access to the plaster cast of the man, where he was able to retrieve 3 strands of hair within the plaster, which were still usable for DNA extraction. Abbott submitted the hairs to the Australian Centre for Ancient DNA at the University of Adelaide, and all was silent afterwards, until February 2018. After nearly a year of processing and examination, the long-awaited results, the key that could tell us all about the identity of this missing person, led to a dead end. This did not stop Abbott, however, as he was still persistent in gaining results. On the 26th of July 2022, Abbott announced that he and genealogist Colleen Fitzpatrick had determined that the man was Carl Charles Webb, an electrical engineer and instrument maker born on the 16th of November 1905 in Footscray, a suburb of Melbourne. Through investigative genetic genealogy, matches were found for descendants of 2 distant cousins of Webb, both on the paternal and on the maternal side. Initially, there were no known pre-death photographs of Webb, but further investigation uncovered his likely presence in a 1921 Swinburne University football team photograph, and in November 2022, Australian Story revealed photographs of Webb from the 1920s found in a Webb family photo album. He was born the youngest of 6 children of Richard and Eliza. The 3 sons would eventually work at the family bakery. When the bakery closed down, he later became an electrical instrument maker. In 1941, he would go on to marry Dorothy, or Doff, Robertson, a pharmacist. The couple moved into a flat in Bromby Street, South Yarra. The marriage was not a harmonious one, however, largely due to Carl's personality. You see, Dorothy described Carl as solitary, having few friends, living a quiet life, and being in bed by 7 p.m. each night, but also moody, violent, and threatening, especially when facing defeat, even over relatively trivial matters. He was very fond of poetry and wrote several poems of his own. Most of them, she quotes, were on the subject of death, which he claims to be his greatest desire. This would be consistent with the copy of the Rubaiyat, which also focuses on the subject of death. Dorothy recalled one instance in 1946 in which her husband apparently attempted unaliving due to overdose. She nursed him back to health, only for him to scold her for it and became more violent. In September 1946, Dorothy fled from her husband following years of physical and verbal abuse. Carl moved out in 1947, and no official records revealing his subsequent whereabouts had been found as of 2022. In 1951, Dorothy was reportedly living in Butte, South Australia, 144 kilometres or 89 miles from Adelaide. Derek speculates that Carl may have gone to Adelaide intending to find her. She applied for a divorce on the 5th of June 1951, citing desertion. The divorce was granted in 1952 in April. Both Abbott and Colleen believed that Carl had serious mental health issues and spiraled down after losing 4 close relatives in 7 years. His history and the autopsy findings suggest he died by suicide by poisoning himself. With the assistance of Fitzpatrick, Abbott made an immense progression into the case. Starting with a piece of clothing, his determination of solving the investigation over a 15-year duration had paid off. We now have an idea about his occupation, his family relationship, his martial status, personality, and behavior. What cannot validify Abbott's findings, however, is the lack of hereditary connection. Although hair samples were collected and examined, the DNA found in the hair samples were provided for analysis only contained mitochondria DNA, meaning that all cells within the stems were genetic. To put it simply, the genetic results could figure out physical attributes and identify any health risks or conditions passed down through generational reproduction. These mitochondrial cells, however, are only maternal and not paternal. So while they could figure out ethnicity and background, they could not determine any direct links to other DNA samples. Not only that, but the studied cells had weakened drastically, both due to the plaster and time itself. This meant they could only gather very basic details of his physical attributes and background. An exhumation was carried out on the 19th of May 2021 by South Australian police. A statement suggests that the body was in reasonable condition and were optimistic about recovering new DNA samples. However, no results have come from this, and the body has remained with the South Australian police since. And that's where we are now. While we may have some information to suggest his identity through photograph and records, we are yet to still gain any direct physical connection to those that Abbott have included into his investigation. And since any other evidence, like the suitcase and the copy of the Rubaiyat being destroyed, very little is available to go back and re-examine. So the case is still open for now. While the stakeholders in this investigation, like Abbott, currently know him as Carl Webb, he will infamously be known in history as the Somerton Man. But that is it. That is the Somerton Man in a nutshell. I've made a full document of what I found in my research for this video with more expansive information. If you want to go check that out, link to the Google Drive is in the description below. Otherwise, hope you enjoyed Scare Studies episode 2. Till then, have a good day. See ya.